Here's a quick demo of the whole Firework system show planner things web front end. So this is built, I guess, mostly on Next.js, but it's got a Python WebSocket server in addition to like the whole backend JS web things, and interacts with the whole box through a little daemon that kind of looks at a command file, and it does stuff. So this is kind of what you're greeted at. I need to put something here when you don't have everything loaded. Um, but kind of going over the bottom is the whole status of the system itself. So is the web socket thing connected? If that's green, then that's what streams in all of these updates. You have the temperature of the Pi, CPU usage, memory usage. The daemon active means that the underlying Python daemon that runs everything, which is pretty important, is running. This tells you the protocol you're currently on. So what that means is that I have various like transmit chips that I've built, and each of them they communicate over serial with the Pi, and each of them kind of has a heartbeat, and that heartbeat has a certain preamble that tells it what it is. So it will kind of automatically figure out um, what it is based on that preamble. So right now it detects that we have my Bilyuscon, the cheap eBay 433 transmitter plugged in at TTY USB 1. You can go into settings and change it. So let's say I said USB 0, we'll break it probably. So yeah, we've had an error reading from serial here, well, probably because that protocol doesn't exist. So updating it, yeah, so we have nothing on USB 2. It wasn't able to find any kind of protocol. So if we set it back to USB 1, then we'll see that it should, actually wait, was it USB 0? What did work? There we go. Set it back to that, so it found and defined the protocol. So that's important because that ultimately, um, that's what we use to actually transmit the show and know what receivers we have available. So this is just some configuration stuff, the brightness of the LEDs on the actual board and the transmit repetition count for the 433. This usually just, for when we're trying to fire it, it'll fire like 4 in really close succession. Um, this is an unfortunate part about the 433 is that with the ESP12, it can really only do a pretty low baud rate for serial, which that ultimately translates to latency. But the nice thing is you can cook latency into the show itself. If you know that it takes 200 milliseconds to send a command, then you just offset everything forward by 200 milliseconds. Anyway, so you have that. You have a manual fire function. So when you do want to like test out a receiver or program them, in the case of the Bilyuscon ones, you need a way to manually fire things. So there's a switch on the board for manual fire, and it's telling me right now the switch isn't on. So I'm actually at the box right now, and I've turned it on. So now that manual fire is there, then I can hit my zone, and I have the cues available for that zone. So down here also we've indicated that we're in manual fire mode, transmit's armed and all of that. So that just gives me the ability to fire off, manual cues there. So and I just turned that off. So to the degree of like being able to plan shows, there's the inventory editor. So this has given me a place to put in all of my cakes and shells that I have and all my fuse, and we'll see why the fuse is important kind of soon. So for each, we have, quantity available I don't use yet, but image URL, YouTube link, and the start time. Again, we'll see where that all comes in addition to duration and fuse delay. I use this to kind of know that, if I have a standardized place of where I put the eFuse, how long until I send a signal to where there's the first shot of the cake or whatever it might be. It's important because the system will automatically apply it to kind of make sure it fires at exactly the time that you had programmed it to. So what we can do is here is go into the show editor, which is kind of like the main builder part. So I can name myself a show. It'll drop in the protocol I currently have loaded. So show, and from here I can start dropping in at various parts of the timeline things that I have in my inventory. So I want to do that. It automatically just gives the label of whatever it is. I can put in an additional delay for whatever reason, like a pre-fire delay, and then I also assign it to a zone and target. So I think the more common way of saying this is a queue. But if I add it in there, then we have it on the timeline. the length that it's on, and how I figured out the length is I just looked at YouTube videos and figured out from the first shot to the end what that is. And then you have it also in the bottom under the queue, so you can actually drag and drop these into whatever it might be. And that's currently broken right now, so I don't really. Yeah, anyway, we'll fix that. Um, so you have those things in there, and so you just go through and you make your show, and you have things like fountains, aerial shells, but there's also a fused shell line. So what I do with my cakes a lot of the time is because I have a 40 shot, a 40 tube racks, I guess, of 1.75 shells. I'll put a fuse across a line of five that will have those fires. So a fused shell line is a way for me to define what those are. So I will say that I'm using a yellow fuse, and you note that we have the burn rate of yellow fuse in there. And I'll say I have 5 shells in the line, and the spacing between each shell is, I don't know, I guess 1.75. Um, and this allows me to put, what shell I'm putting in here. I don't really have, there's not really a lot of reason for this. I guess each of them has a lift delay and a fuse delay. So I can mix and match here, whatever it might be, or I can just say apply the first one to all of them. So I add the fuse line, yellow shell, confirm that all, and I can name it if I have something goofy there. If I try to add it to a zone that's already assigned, so zone 1, target 2, or target 1, I can't. So we'll put it in number 2. So we have that there, and also we can kind of drag these around to kind of make it, we can zoom in to kind of time it more. So we go through and we, put all of our stuff in here. I don't know, just set up our nice little show. Of course, we need a fountain to be running the whole time. I guess that's a thing. Four. Here we go. So this has things like, the amount of items in it, the total duration of the show, how many zones I used, how many queues I used, the closest fire, which thus far doesn't really mean anything, max concurrency, meaning what's the most amount of things running at any given time. So that's just some stuff. I don't really know how it's useful yet, but I put it there. So we can add it, and when you do add it, it'll prompt you to put in like a password for it. So before loading it, before anything, you need to know this to actually fire it. So now we can look at receivers. So if you're kind of trying to set up your show and you're walking around the field trying to figure out what goes into what, this is a really easy way to know that, okay, for this receiver, bilious, blah, whatever, vomit 1, I need to put highfalutin at 1, my yellow fuse times 5 shells on 2, a hot cake on 3, and be all and all fountain on 4. So that kind of just gives, and then with my own protocol, with my receivers, I will have continuity and battery. So that will tell me, are we connected to it? What's the battery percentage on the receiver itself? And do I have continuity on these? Which I can then use for pre-fire checks to make sure that, okay, all of the things I have things wired to, I have continuity for. So we can go to the main stage here, and we do have the ability to play through it. So what this does is then, as the time hits, we'll start a YouTube video at exactly the time the thing starts. And so that kind of allows us to simulate it. It looks like my link for be all end all is broken, which I will fix. But for the hot, it goes, and then highfalutin starts. So you kind of have like, it's not a really high fidelity version, but just kind of an idea of what's going to be going off at a given time. We see the yellow fuse times 5 shells is firing, but I don't yet have a way to really portray shells well, because you'd have to know exactly what number shell out of that you're running, and I just don't have time to catalog all of those in YouTube links. But anyway, if you play through and think everything's good, you can kind of look down and see, your status, and we can load the show, which we kind of do from this menu or that menu. So loading it means I just send it to my receivers or my RF front end, and that will go through its checks to make sure that it's actually ready to fire. So right now I have little errors down in there. So cannot start a show when the start button's on. That was my bad. So fixed it, try it again. So the show is loaded. It's waiting on the start button to be pressed. So we have some status down here that we have the Great Stuff show loaded. We're not transmitting currently. So this, if we transmitted anything in the last 5 or 10 seconds, this will show yellow. The show cursor is at 0 seconds, and the show is stopped. And so transmit's armed, manual fire is disarmed. So if we go, I'll take my key and I'll disarm the arming switch. So transmit's now unarmed, and so it won't start. But rearm it. So the whole gist is that once we're good on there, then I hit delegated start. We're ready to go. We can launch the show, and it will kind of count us through. It's not super high fidelity because I just don't want to have it updating super often. But we'll run through and just kind of run the show here. So this is really early. You can only stop it currently from the whole panel. Let's see, we're transmitting, so that's live. But yeah, also the show will stop firing once it fires the last thing. But yeah, so that's pretty much the whole gist of it. There's a lot more to kind of do here, the pre-checking and stuff, and I think a lot of it predicates itself on getting my new receivers and cooking that into there. But it does do what I need it to do. I can run my shows. I had a little show where I wired everything up to smoke and just had that all go off. So it'll do. The ones that I'm going to be making, the new transmitters, have a lot more capability to do uh, a lot tighter of timing because inherently if I'm using a single transmitter and it's kind of an authoritative thing, if I want three things to go off at exactly the same time, um, that's kind of difficult to do. The best I can do is space them out by maybe 60 milliseconds, which, front to back, you're talking about a 180 millisecond delay, which humans can easily kind of perceive. So my protocol, the way it would work is that they're loaded onto each receiver, and each receiver knows the timestamp it needs to fire, and they're all the timestamps are synchronized. So that will work better. But yeah, not a whole lot more here. It's just kind of a fun little side project to do. But yeah, if anybody has feedback, or I guess at some point I'll shop this out and see if people want to use it, let me know.